Justin Trudeau's House of Cards is crumbling, with longtime allies jumping ship in the midst of political chaos. Most notably, Chrystia Freeland Resigns, stepping down from her role as finance minister just hours before she was set to unveil the fall economic statement, which reveals the Liberal government's $61.9 billion deficit for the 2023-2024 fiscal year. This is over 50% larger than promised, with Freeland previously stating the deficit would not exceed $40.1 billion. Freeland did not spare any jabs while resigning from Trudeau's cabinet. First, she revealed that behind closed doors, the upper echelon of the Liberal Party has been anything but unified, contrary to Trudeau's claims after rejecting Liberal MPs' calls for him to step down in October. Freeland addressed Trudeau in her public resignation, stating, "For the past number of weeks, you and I have found ourselves at odds about the best path forward for Canada." The source of their dispute would seem to be Freeland's reluctance to drive up the federal deficit even more than it already was. After warning about Donald Trump's threat of 25% tariffs, Freeland went on to say, "We need to take that threat extremely seriously. That means keeping our fiscal powder dry today so we have the reserves we may need for a coming tariff war. That means eschewing costly political gimmicks, which we can ill afford and make Canadians doubt that we recognize the gravity of the moment." It almost feels unbelievable to say these words, but Freeland is correct. However, it's even worse than she lets on. Trump's tariff threats do necessitate intelligent counteractions, but Canadians have been long unable to afford the Trudeau administration's costly political gimmicks. Since Freeland assumed her role as finance minister in 2020, the Canadian government has added $515 billion to the federal deficit. To put this in perspective, all other governments combined throughout the entire history of Canada added $630 billion in debt, meaning in just a few years, Freeland and Trudeau almost doubled the entire history of Canadian debt. Donald Trump has already used the unfolding havoc as a chance to further embarrass Justin Trudeau. In a social media post, Trump claimed the great state of Canada is stunned as the finance minister resigns, or was fired, from her position by Governor Justin Trudeau, continuing his running joke about annexing Canada and turning our nation into America's 51st state. Trump went on to say that Freeland will not be missed, a statement we'd assume most Canadians can actually get behind. With a rare display of humility, though, Freeland admitted that Canadians, quote, "know when we are working for them, and they equally know when we are focused on ourselves. Inevitably, our time in government will come to an end." With that said, one rare instance of backbone and honesty does not clean Freeland from the guilt of bankrupting Canadians. We must not forget that she was the one who held Trudeau's hand as they froze the bank accounts of everyday Canadians for daring to oppose their tyrannical COVID mandates. She also bragged about how those very mandates pushed people who were reluctant to receive an experimental pharmaceutical product, now proven to be ineffective, over the breaking point. After stepping down, the search for Freeland's replacement immediately ensued. The first in line was Housing Minister Sean Fraser, who responded by immediately resigning from Trudeau's cabinet as well. Fraser claimed his resignation and decision to not seek re-election is out of a desire to spend more time with his family. However, it's highly likely that he simply preferred to walk away from the political battlefield than to be used as a human shield. After Fraser, next in line was Randy Beausoleil, who had to resign from the cabinet just weeks ago over lying about Indigenous heritage, as well as being linked to several different criminal operations, including defrauding and sharing a business address with an international drug smuggler who was recently caught with 460 pounds of cocaine. For obvious reasons, Beausoleil was not chosen. The honor of Fall Guy ended up being bestowed upon Dominic LeBlanc, who has now been sworn in as Canada's next finance minister. Up until December 15th, Dominic LeBlanc had been serving as Canada's Minister of Public Safety. His responsibilities included overseeing the Canadian Border Services Agency, the RCMP, and crime prevention. In other words, a man who utterly failed at his last position, with crime out of control, the CBSA losing track of 30,000 people ordered to be deported, and the RCMP using private surveillance companies to spy on Canadians, has now been put in charge of Canada's out-of-control fiscal budget. Dominic LeBlanc has also had a history of abusing power granted to him. In 2019, he was front and center of a scandal when it was uncovered that 5 out of his 6 judicial appointments were found out to be his neighbors, relatives, and lawyers. LeBlanc was also the minister who recently led the charge on the outlawing of 324 more firearms, noting that after seizing property from law-abiding citizens, the Liberal government is considering sending it all to Ukraine. Unsurprisingly, this fiasco has only further illuminated NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's hypocrisy and self-serving nature. After declaring that Canadians are struggling with the cost of living, cannot afford a home, and struggle to put food on the table, Singh called on Justin Trudeau to resign. You'd be forgiven for wondering why Singh is calling for Trudeau's resignation after single-handedly keeping him in power by refusing countless times to oust him in non-confidence votes. However, we must recognize the outcomes of these two scenarios. If Trudeau is kicked out of office in a non-confidence vote, an election would likely ensue, resulting in the Liberal and NDP parties becoming politically impotent, with a definitive Conservative majority likely to form. Although if Trudeau resigns, a replacement from the Liberal Party would take his place, and no election would have to be called so long as Singh continues to keep them in power. This distinction is highly relevant considering Jagmeet Singh's pension doesn't kick in until February 25, 2025. It couldn't be more obvious that this is the motivation, with NDP MP Peter Julian saying his party will force an election in late February, early March. Convenient timing, don't you think? Lastly, let's check in on the man of the hour, Justin Trudeau. Almost immediately following the disintegration of his party, Trudeau gave an impassioned speech with a level of conviction only a drama teacher could muster. After declaring how proud he is of the accomplishments that the Liberals have achieved over the past 9 years, he went on a tirade about Canada's next likely Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre. Trudeau declared, "Poilievre claims Canada is broken while trying his damnedest to break it." These are choice words coming from a man who has caused one of the largest housing bubbles in the world, presided over a 50% increase in violent crime, facilitated mass migration, who sends $50 billion tax dollars overseas while food bank usage skyrockets at home, who turned families against each other while scapegoating unvaccinated Canadians, and who has turned our nation into an international laughingstock and cautionary tale. In his delusional speech, Trudeau declared, "We are not living in simple times," which is true, and that's why Canada needs a leader who is not simple themselves. Trudeau has time and again proven to be incompetent, malicious, and self-servingly hypocritical, traits he and his coalition partner share. Unfortunately, delusional, tyrannical, psychopathic narcissists never give up their power willingly. It's also important to note that each one of those very charged labels is applied with extreme consideration. Every single one of those pathological traits applies to a man who is able to boast about his accomplishments, which are better described as social and economic destruction, while his world crumbles around him. It might be time to face the facts, Canada. It seems highly unlikely that Trudeau will ever relinquish power by his own choosing and will likely have to be dragged out of office. With that said, we hope we're wrong and this stain on Canada's history washes itself away so that we can start to reconstruct the rubble he's left in his wake.